Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a really fascinating set of sources you've shared this time, articles, research, even some personal stories, all looking at, well, how we connect, or sometimes really don't connect, in our relationships.
That's right. We're diving into the whole complex world of communication or the lack of it, emotional distance, and even things like the silent treatment.
Yeah, that silent treatment aspect is particularly interesting.
Definitely. So our mission today is to unpack what your sources tell us. How does this distance actually build up? Why can silence be so destructive? Where do these patterns even come from? And crucially, what insights do we get for navigating these things better?
Getting informed, but getting to the core of it quickly.
Exactly. Straight to the heart of the matter.
Okay, let's start there then. Emotional distance. The sources mention it as a core concept. What are we really talking about here?
Fundamentally, it's that feeling, that you're just not connecting with your partner on that deeper level. It's described in the material as feeling isolated, but within the relationship itself.
So you could be living together doing all the normal things.
Right. Sharing space, sharing bills, but emotionally, you feel completely alone, miles apart.
Okay, so it's less about active conflict, initially anyway, and more about a lack of that real connection. What makes that happen? What causes that gap?
Well, the sources point to a couple of big things. One is unmet emotional needs in the relationship, not feeling seen or heard or understood. That creates a void.
Makes sense.
But the material also really stresses how outside pressures work. Stress, money worries, health issues, you name it, can play a huge role.
How so?
They just drain your energy.
Yeah.
Your focus goes elsewhere, and there's less left over to actually nurture the relationship, that emotional bond.
Life gets in the way, basically, and the relationship starves a bit. I saw that term silent divorce used in the sources. That sounds heavy.
It really does capture, doesn't it? It describes that hidden emotional chasm. The couple is still together, maybe looks fine from the outside.
Presenting that united front.
Exactly. But inside, there's this profound loneliness, resentment building up because that emotional connection has just evaporated.
Wow, a silent divorce.
Oh.
That sounds incredibly painful because everything looks okay, but the core is gone. Okay, let's shift to the silent treatment. This feels different, less like a slow drift, more like deliberate withholding.
That's a good way to put it. The sources define it very specifically as an active response, usually to conflict or feeling hurt. It's ignoring the problem, acting like it doesn't exist,
Or acting like the other person doesn't exist.
Yes, exactly that. One source explicitly said acting like you don't exist is a really powerful and damaging way to show contempt or just dismiss someone entirely.
And the impact? Is silence really as bad as, say, a huge argument?
According to these sources, absolutely. Sometimes worse. Because an argument, even a bad one, at least keeps some kind of connection, some path open. Silence just shuts it all down.
Offers no way forward.
Right. And prolonged silence, we're talking days here, is actually described in some of the material as abusive or manipulative. It makes the person on the receiving end feel completely unimportant, invisible.
Like they could be discarded. I think one source used really stark language.
It did. Thrown away like garbage. That phrase really conveys the depth of the hurt. And the sources also point out it doesn't just punish that one person, it hurts the whole family system.
Thrown away like garbage. That's brutal. And it connects to something else I saw about how our brains process this stuff. That rejection pain feels like physical pain.
Yes, that was a really striking finding in the material. Research on social exclusion, basically being ignored or rejected, shows that the brain pathways that light up, they overlap significantly with the pathways for physical pain.
So it's not just a metaphor when someone says being ignored hurts.
Apparently not. It suggests our brains register that social pain, that feeling of being invisible to someone we love, in a way that's quite similar to a physical injury. It can literally hurt.
Okay, wow. So distance can build quietly from unmet needs, external stress, maybe leading to that silent divorce. Or it can be the active, painful, silent treatment, which our brains register like actual pain. Where do these patterns even begin? Are we just wired this way?
The sources really push back on the idea that it's just innate. They lean heavily towards these being learned patterns,
Learned where?
often deep roots in our family history.
Yeah.
The silent treatment itself is mentioned as something kids can pick up just by watching how their parents or caregivers handle conflict.
So it's not just about this relationship right now. It's carrying baggage, essentially, patterns from generations back.
Precisely. The material references Bowen family systems theory. The basic idea is that the ways we learn to relate in our family of origin, they tend to keep playing out in our current families, our current relationships.
Mm. And there was something about emotional cutoff.
Right. That's when people try to distance themselves, emotionally or even physically, from intense family stuff. But Bowen's theory suggests, and the sources echo this, that cutoff doesn't really resolve the underlying tension. Paradoxically, it can actually ramp up the emotional intensity in your current life.
That's fascinating. So trying to escape the past actually makes it louder in the present. And it's linked to anxiety.
Exactly. Cutoff isn't just about conflict avoidance. It's seen as a way anxiety gets managed or mismanaged across generations in a family system. It's about how that whole system deals with emotional reactivity.
Okay, and this ties into attachment theory too, right? Our early bond.
Yes, definitely. Attachment theory comes up quite a bit. Those very first experiences with caregivers, they build what's called an internal working model. It's like a blueprint in our minds for relationships, what we expect, how we behave, especially when we're stressed or need support.
So how does that blueprint affect communication and distance later on?
Well, the sources draw some pretty clear lines. For instance, if your early care was inconsistent, maybe sometimes warm, sometimes distant, or unavailable.
Unpredictable.
Right. That can lead to what's called an anxious ambivalent attachment style in adulthood. These folks often crave closeness, but when they feel insecure or angry, they might become quite demanding, maybe argumentative, potentially pushing partners away.
Okay. And the opposite, what if parenting was rejecting?
If parents were consistently rejecting or insensitive, that can lead to an avoidant attachment style. These individuals learn early on to sort of shut down their negative emotions to cope.
So they seem detached.
Yeah, they can seem detached, maybe unreliable to a partner who's looking for emotional connection and support.
Yeah.
Then there's also fearful attachment mentioned,
Fearful.
where closeness itself feels dangerous, likely due to frightening or traumatic early experiences. These adults might almost disable their attachment system, fearing that getting close will just lead to pain. So they might withdraw intensely or avoid conflict at all costs.
And neglect was mentioned too as being particularly difficult for later relationships.
Sadly, yes. The sources note that adults who experience significant neglect as children often face real struggles in finding happiness and security in their adult relationships. It sets a very tough foundation.
So our template for closeness and conflict gets set really early. Wow. The sources also mentioned a triangulation. What's that about in families?
Ah, yes, triangulation. It's described as a way families sometimes cope with tension between two people, often the parents.
How does it work?
Instead of dealing directly with their conflict, they pull in a third person, frequently a child, to sort of diffuse the stress between the original pair.
So the focus shifts to the child.
Exactly. It takes the heat off the parent's issue. But the material is clear. While it might lower the immediate anxiety for the adults, it's really problematic for the third person, especially if it's a child.
What kind of problems?
It puts them at high risk for developing things like depression, anxiety, maybe feeling isolated. It also stops the parents from actually working on their own stuff, their own ability to handle things maturely. And it can really interfere with a child developing their own solid sense of self.
Okay, so we've traced how distance builds, the pain of silence, and how these patterns might stem from family history, attachment, even these unhelpful dynamics like triangulation. Given all that complexity, what do the sources say about moving forward? How can people break these cycles?
Well, the common thread through all the material is the absolute centrality of communication. It's presented as, the basic lifeblood of a relationship. It's how emotional closeness is built and maintained.
And when it breaks down?
Distance grows, resentment builds. It's almost inevitable.
The sources mention research on communication and satisfaction, but with a bit of a twist. It wasn't quite as simple as good communication equals happy relationship.
Right, that was an interesting point. While, yes, poor communication, more negativity, less positivity, just less effective talking and listening is linked to lower satisfaction.
That makes intuitive sense.
It does. But some of the research highlighted suggests that just looking at the observable communication patterns might not predict long-term happiness as strongly as we used to think. Other things might be just as or even more important.
Like what?
Like how partners interpret each other's actions and words, the meaning they make, and also how they handle those external life stressors together as a team. That might matter more over the long haul than just, say, using perfect I statements all the time.
That shifts the focus a bit, doesn't it? It's not just about the technique, but the underlying meaning and teamwork. What about those specific negative cycles people get stuck in? The sources call them demon dialogues.
Yes, that term came up. It describes these recurring destructive loops. There's find the bad guy, that's all about blame, pointing fingers.
Hmm.
Then the protest polka. That's that classic dynamic.
Right.
One partner anxiously pursues, maybe criticizes, trying to get a reaction, while the other withdraws, shuts down.
The pursuer-distancer dance.
Exactly. And then there's freeze and flee, where things have gotten so overwhelming, maybe there's a long history of distance, that both partners just shut down. They're both withdrawn, disengaged.
And just trying to avoid conflict altogether, that doesn't work either, according to the sources.
No, definitely not. The material warns that avoiding conflict just means feelings get bottled up. They fester, and eventually they tend to explode, often in ways that are much more damaging than addressing the issue earlier would have been.
And conflict phobia was even linked to affairs.
Yeah, interestingly, in some sources, that fear of engaging in any conflict was listed as a potential trigger for infidelity, as if the lack of resolution or connection becomes unbearable.
Okay, so no bottling, no explosions. What practical steps, what strategies did the sources offer for actually improving things, for breaking these patterns?
There were quite a few concrete suggestions. A big one is consistency, just making time for regular, honest conversations. They don't do huge marathon talks, but consistent check-ins.
Listening.
Listening was huge, but not just hearing the words. The sources emphasize listening to really understand, why does your partner feel that way? What's their perspective? Paying attention to their tone, their body language, their face, not just waiting to jump in with your reply.
Listening to understand, not just to respond. That feels key.
Absolutely. And techniques like reflective listening were mentioned, just briefly saying back what you think you heard. Like, okay, so it sounds like you felt frustrated when. That can really help clarify and show you're trying to get it.
Makes sense. What else?
Expressing your own feelings clearly, but calmly. That means avoiding blame, using those I statements, I felt hurt when, instead of you ignored me. And being specific, what was the behavior, what was the impact on you?
Keep it focused on the action, not attacking the person.
Right. And staying calm is vital. Tone matters so much. Sometimes, the sources suggested, just saying, look, I need a second, I'm feeling overwhelmed and can't think straight, is actually a really healthy move to prevent things from escalating.
Taking a pause.
Yeah. And related to that is paying attention to nonverbal communication. Apparently, when we're distracted, we're much more likely to misinterpret body language or tone. A therapist, the material noted, can sometimes help couples see how they're affecting each other nonverbally and correct those misinterpretations.
Boundaries came up too, setting personal boundaries.
Yes, definitely. Setting clear, healthy boundaries is framed as crucial for protecting your own well-being, but also for creating safety within the relationship, knowing what's okay and what's not okay and how you interact.
And nurturing intimacy beyond just the physical.
That was stressed too. Building emotional intimacy, sharing hopes, fears, dreams. Intellectual intimacy, sharing ideas, interests. Even spiritual intimacy, shared values. Supporting each other's growth.
I liked the point about bringing back playfulness.
Me too. It's easy to forget, isn't it? But shared laughter, having fun, trying new things together. The sources highlighted these as really powerful ways to reconnect and build positive shared experiences.
And looking inward. Self-reflection.
Huge. Understanding your own history. How did your family handle emotions and conflict? How might that be shaping how you react now? The focus is really on understanding your own role in the dance, not just blaming the other person. Personal growth is key.
And finally, getting help from outside.
Absolutely crucial,
Yeah.
especially when patterns are really stuck. Couples counseling was strongly recommended. It gives you that safe space to identify these dynamics, the attachment issues, the demon dialogues, and to practice new ways of talking and listening.
With guidance.
Exactly. A therapist can help restructure those conversations to build more security and acceptance. And also, leaning on supportive friends, mentors, maybe groups, just not being isolated with the problem. Though a caveat was added in some sources about seeking specialized professional help if there's abuse involved, as those dynamics require a different approach than typical conflict resolution.
Okay, wow. This deep dive, pulling together everything you shared, it really shows how layered these issues are. Emotional distance, the silent treatment. It's not just about poor communication skills, is it?
Not at all. It's so deeply tangled up with our family histories, those early attachment bonds, how we learn to manage anxiety.
Yeah.
It's systemic.
Right, and that finding about the brain, about rejection, feeling like physical pain, That really stays with me. It just underlines how much these dynamics truly impact us.
It really does. It makes the need for conscious effort for understanding ourselves and our partners feel incredibly important.
The power seems to be in recognizing these patterns, maybe seeing where they came from, and then actively choosing to do things differently.
Exactly. It's about breaking the cycle. So thinking about that, about how these emotional patterns can ripple down through generations, here's a final thought for you listening. Can you pinpoint maybe one specific pattern, how conflict was handled or how closeness was shown, or maybe avoided in your own family growing up that you don't want to repeat? And what's one small, conscious choice you could make, maybe even this week, to foster a different kind of interaction in your own important relationships?